Give me everything or nothing at all.
If you watched my 007 Nightfire video, you probably know that I was obsessed with James Bond as a kid. You probably saw some of that excitement return as I visited one of my favorite games from that time. Is James Bond
A sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War, whose boyish charms, though wasted on me, obviously appeal to that young woman I sent out to evaluate you?
Yes.
Point taken.
But the games are still pretty good. I loved Nightfire as a competent shooter that has many of the traits we look for in first-person shooter games, even to this day. On top of that, it did a great job of capturing what fans of the series love about the movies and how it translated the action and the campy dialogue into a game. Everything or Nothing, however, puts its arm deeper into the well and pulls out even more of what keeps me coming back. It's the all-star cast, it's the polished driving missions. It's Pierce Brosnan lending his voice to a game for the very first time.
Prepare to die, Mr. Bond.
You first.
On top of that, Everything or Nothing plays beat for beat like an extended 007 film in an excellent way, even in spite of what some of the harsher critics said back in the day about how it was less of a game than an interactive movie. That's funny, I wonder if they knew where we would be in 2020 if they would have felt the same way. Opening tutorial, the end of 007's previous mission? Check. That mission leads into an original song in sequence? Check, check. You actually get to go to MI6 to meet M and Q? Hell yeah. It's a small detail, but I love it. I always thought the briefing process was missing from previous games, and it adds just a little bit more immersion. But before I get too far ahead of myself, let's take a look at what happens in the story. Upon returning to London after saving the world once more, M, who is actually played by the actual Dame Judi Dench, informs Bond that Oxford doctor Katya Nadanova, played by actual Heidi Klum, and her humanitarian nanobot technology are in danger of being kidnapped and stolen by a terrorist organization run by Nikolai Diavolo, portrayed by actual Willem Dafoe. 007 sets off to the Sahara Desert where he finds Nadanova being kidnapped. To save and protect the nanobot technology, I guess, he blows up the lab they're housed in before going after her. After rappelling down the side of the building, Bond chases Nadanova to a weaponized train. It's here you might notice a drastic shift in the series. The camera has been pulled back from first person to a third person view. I love this change not because the camera was holding back the previous games, but it just takes the series in a fresh direction. Bond feels like he has an unleashed range of motion. He can roll, he can take cover, crouch aggressively. You can see his face now. Honestly, and again, I love Nightfire, this feels like the Bond game this series was building to all along. The free range of motion gives so much more of a 007 feel. If you think of the movies, James is flying all over the place at some points and being slow and stealthy in others. He doesn't just do one kind of sleuthing. There's a lot of fight and flight and running and gunning. Nightfire didn't have a sprint button, understandably, and while I think the game is made in a way that works fine without one, it definitely forces you into a specific style of play. Again, not a bad thing, but it's different. Everything or Nothing adds so many different moves and maneuvers that it gives you the freedom to just be the James Bond you want to be. You can be the one-man army you recognize from the heavy action sequences of the films. You can also be slow and deliberate if you want to be stealthy. The game does reward you for being stealthy in the final mission reviews at the end of each mission, but you can also reward yourself by taking out one person with a rocket launcher shot straight to the face. With this change in camera came a change in aiming and taking out enemies, one of the most important parts of a 007 game. Aiming in Everything or Nothing is kind of a mixed bag. Instead of being able to aim down the sights, you hold the L trigger to lock onto enemies, and within the reticle is a small red dot you can control with the right stick for precision aiming, which means headshots are aplenty. The biggest issue I have is that the lock-on seems to focus on who Bond himself is facing rather than where your camera is facing. So if Bond is facing away from where the camera is, like you're looking him in the eye instead of the back of his head, there is a solid chance you won't aim at who you want to, and in fact, a lot of the time, nothing will happen at all. I died quite a lot thanks to this issue, but luckily I made it through the whole game. Having to redo the missions, though, got pretty grating after a while, especially because of the lack of consistent checkpoints in each mission. It did take away some of my enjoyment. After descending the burning building, 007 gets into a hot pursuit with a weaponized train. Here we get our first taste of the wildly overhauled driving missions added to Everything or Nothing. Not only are the missions more fleshed out, but the actual driving mechanics are now based off the same engine used for the Need for Speed series at the time, allegedly. Even then, it takes a bit of getting used to because the driving is much stiffer than in previous games where the driving felt a little bit more arcadey. I'm not saying this is a driving sim, but each vehicle handles a bit differently. In fact, I'd say that depending on the difficulty you choose, these missions can be downright challenging, and I like it that way. The biggest difference between these missions and missions from previous games is the open-ended nature of them. Sure, there are specific waypoints and specific objectives that don't change, but there are different pathways, shortcuts, and bond moments to find. In Nightfire, vehicular missions were similar to Cruising USA, where you have a definitive start and end. There's only one way to do it. Here, you have a small sandbox to explore for many of them. While the first train mission isn't a mission you can really do much exploring, you have two different options to proceed. The normal way, which is kind of what's hinted at in the cutscene before starting, is taking your Cayenne Turbo, which is a crossover, and going after the train. In the opposite direction, when you start the level, you can find a hidden motorcycle. These two different vehicles take you on two different pathways to get to the train that eventually meet up for the final action sequence. It's a great little showcase of the options you have while also telling you to get creative about how you proceed. You might just be rewarded for it. Remember, once you pass the tutorial mission, these missions I have described are the first two missions in the game, which to me provide an excellent showcase of what's to come. The variety of missions is really impressive. Rappelling down the side of a blown out building and chasing down a train is a hell of a way to start a game. Plus, the missions just flow together really well for the most part, almost like mission breaks or checkpoints in between larger objectives. However, again, that still doesn't make up for the fact that checkpoints in the actual levels wouldn't have been a welcome change, because not every mission is a wild success. For instance, the Death of an Agent mission, which was a slog to get through because of the long hallways and required prolonged use of thermal vision to navigate an underground maze, was a nightmare. The issue is, it's just hard to see over the blur of blue on the screen. I actually made my way through the entire maze first try, died, and then got stuck in it repeatedly for at least 4 or 5 attempts after that. I literally had to put the game down and come back later because of how frustrated I was. But let's get back to the story. After you finally catch the train and stealth kill your way through it, you run into a familiar face you haven't seen since the movie Moonraker in 1979. Jaws, the silent razor-toothed skyscraper of a man portrayed by Richard Kiel, is back. It was amazing seeing him after so long, especially because he was my favorite baddie as a kid. Last we saw him, we assumed he was disintegrated in space, so seeing him again made me squee. After zapping him with some workplace hazards, you finally make your way to Ndanova and escape via helicopter. Now, in a normal game, this is the end of the story, but in Everything or Nothing, it just means you're about to fly a helicopter through the remnants of ancient Egypt, which is just really cool. After delivering Ndanova, you kiss a bit, as you do with random strangers, and oh snap, it turns out she's working with Diavolo all along. It's here where we find out that Diavolo was former Bond villain Max Zorin's pupil. Zorin, expertly brought to life in the polarizing A View to a Kill by the ever-talented Christopher Walken,
I'm happiest in the saddle.
was thrown off the Golden Gate Bridge after trying to corner the Silicon market by flooding Silicon Valley.
Yes, we once played bridge together. He lost.
Jaws and Max Zorin again? Was this a rejected Roger Moore movie script? Doesn't matter, I love it, let's make this a movie. Anyway, Diavolo now has revenge fueling his plans. What are these plans? Diavolo wants to repurpose the nanobots to eat metal so he can load them into the shells of former Soviet nukes and launch them all over the world to reduce cities to rubble. Then he wants to overthrow the Russian government and claim Europe for himself. This sets the game off on this global goose chase to get Diavolo. There are 4 main locales you go to on your journey. We mentioned Egypt already, but the others are Peru, New Orleans, and Moscow. Peru is where you spend a lot of your time in the game, and you can tell the most effort was put into fleshing this particular area out. That said, I've never visited Peru and cannot speak to the accuracy about its depiction. I can, however, speak with 100% clarity that New Orleans looks like crap. It doesn't even remotely resemble the city. I was really excited to see the city portrayed in a game since it never really gets any love from any games, really. And still, it gets no love here. The only thing that resembles anything correctly is the Pontchartrain Bridge. Why is that? Because it's a long, straight bridge with no defining features. If they mess that up, I really don't think I would have had any hope for any of this. Diablo wants to test his hacked nanobots by destroying the levees that surround the city and flood it. As someone who's still pretty broken by the events that happened a year after this game's release, this plot point kind of stings, but it also amplifies just how horrible of a person Diablo is. Fortunately, we're aided by CIA agent Maya, who helps us name and locate arms dealer Arkady Yayakov, who is repurposing the nanobots. It's here where you start to realize just how many characters are in this game. Like, for instance, Yayakov has his own henchman named LaRouge. There are two Bond girls, Maya and Serena St. Germain, who's the geologist who helps 003 in Peru. Even Q has a second in command. After stopping Jaws and his tanker of nanobots, we travel back to Peru to race for a meeting with Diablo face to face. After we win the meeting, we're ambushed and Serena is locked in a secret cell. It really doesn't amount to anything, we just end up rescuing her. She's just sitting in a room alone for about 15 minutes. After rescuing her, Bond goes to Russia to stop Diablo from seizing the Kremlin and destroying it. In a final string of missions, we chase him into the secret Soviet underground nuke silo where the nanobots are installed and aimed at cities around the world. Before we can reach him, Jaws has his final stand. You have to face off against him with a flamethrower. After 2 failed attempts at killing him with rocket launchers, we finally have a final showdown with Diablo while he tries to launch a rocket at London as a last-ditch effort, just as a screw you to James. We blow him up again and race to destroy the rocket before it takes off. Honestly, I wish I could tell you all the missions that happen in between, but you probably don't want to be here all day, so here are some highlights. There's a rally car race and motorcycle segment where you have to drive into a platinum mine. There's a speed-style don't go below 60 miles per hour segment in New Orleans, and the chase where you destroy Jaws' tanker is a blast. Otherwise, the missions with gunplay are all pretty wild and varied as well, with a lot of verticality and change as you go through the game, so it never really gets old. This all really keeps you guessing with what could come next, and while the issue I had with aiming and the thermal vision segments can prohibit you from having a flawless time, they aren't enough to make you stop playing the game as a whole. The positives outweigh the negatives every single time. The graphics have aged pretty much about as gracefully as you can expect. Some of the levels have aged pretty terribly, and at the worst, the game can look kind of drab like a maze of the same hallways over and over, but segments like the Ruined Tower and the Kiss Kiss Club are still pretty nice to look at. They aren't cel-shaded perfection and will only get worse looking over time, but for now it holds up because of the mission structures and variety. Even at its worst, the game holds up pretty well. It's still a ton of fun and captures the essence of the 007 character during the Brosnan era, where movies started to feel like video games anyway. What I find fascinating about this is that this is the first time Brosnan lended his voice to the character in the game, but it was also his last portrayal of 007. Many people were pretty upset with Die Another Day, and rightfully so, despite me defending it as perfectly distilled trash in a very good way. I think it's fitting that Brosnan ended his career on a high note with Everything or Nothing. This was the 5th Brosnan film we never got. It reeled back the insanity of Die Another Day and maintained the high-action elements of the movie without going too far over the deep end. Looking back at how explosive of a debut the GoldenEye movie and game were at the beginning of his career, it only makes sense that Pierce stepped away from the character after being a part of what is arguably the best game in the entire series. 007 Everything or Nothing puts a tight little bow on his run as the beloved 00 agent. But that's Everything or Nothing. Tell me in the comments down below if you played this game as a kid. Have you played it recently? Has it been 10 years since you played it last? Let me know. Let me know your favorite mission. I certainly could imagine that a lot of them are up for debate as what the best mission is, as there are a lot of good ones. If you like the video, be sure to leave a like on it. And lastly, if you want to see more videos, hit subscribe and hit the bell icon next to it to make sure you're always notified of one of my uploads. But until next time, this has been Under 10 Hours. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your week.